We're talking about these remarkable people in Iran who go out on the streets to demand basic human rights, basic civil rights. Nasrin does that in the courtroom in so many ways. Well, we can apply their lesson and inspiration to us here in the United States.
That's the voice of filmmaker Jeff Kaufman. He, along with his documentary filmmaking partner, Marcia S. Ross, are today's guests on the special bonus episode of Press the Button with guest host Farshad Farahat.
My name is Farshad Farahat. I'm an Iranian-American actor and a member of the Ploughshares Fund Board of Directors. As a survivor of chemical warfare in the Iran-Iraq War, I want to uncover stories that show the real human cost of foreign policy. For this special series of conversations, we'll ask, when it comes to national security, who is truly safe? Whose voices are heard loudest? Whose lives are buried? And who is profiting? At Ploughshares Fund, our mission is to ensure that everyone has a right to a safe and secure future. In this series, we'll explore the experiences of those striving to heal from military and ethnic conflict. Thanks for listening.
Nasrin Sotoudeh is a prominent lawyer in Iran who's been fighting for children's rights, women's rights, and human rights.
She is one of the bravest voices in Iran.
She took on cases that other lawyers were too afraid to take on.
We've seen Nasrin Sotoudeh jailed for defending human rights.
It has cost her and her young family a lot.
Protesting against the law which forces Iranian women to wear the hijab.
The country's most prominent human rights activist and a voice for the voiceless.
I had been in Iran maybe a week, and I knew how to toe the line as a woman. And then I meet Nasrin Sotoudeh, who doesn't toe the line at all.
On Wednesday, Nasrin Sotoudeh was again arrested. She had been tried and convicted in absentia. According to her husband, she intends to continue her activism from prison.
Welcome, everyone, to Press the Button. My guests today are filmmakers Marcia Ross and Jeff Kaufman. Their latest documentary, Nasrin, is a portrait of one of the world's most courageous human rights activists and political prisoners, Nasrin Sotoudeh, who has been called the Nelson Mandela of Iran for her work fighting for the rights of children, LGBT prisoners, religious minorities, journalists, artists, and those facing the death penalty. Nasrin is also a story of Iran's resilient women's rights movement. It was filmed in the streets of Iran by anonymous men and women who risked arrest to document history as it unfolded. The film has been hailed as breathtaking by the New York Times, eye-opening, vivid, and extraordinary by the Hollywood Reporter, and is a strong contender for a 2021 Best Documentary Oscar nomination. Marcia and Jeff, congratulations on a powerful film, and welcome to Press the Button.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Can we start by updating the listeners on the latest status of Nasrin? I understand she was arrested and sentenced to 36 years in prison, plus 148 lashes. What is her latest status?
Yes, in June 2018, while we were filming with Nasrin, but not because of the filming, Nasrin was arrested and ultimately sentenced to decades in prison and dozens of lashes. She had been serving in Evin prison for quite some time. With the breakout of COVID, which has hit Iran especially hard, and Iran has famously unsanitary and unhealthy prisons, she launched a 46-day hunger strike in August of 2021, calling for prisoners to be released so that there wouldn't be overcrowding and to save lives. She got international attention for that effort, and but her health obviously was in danger, and she went into that with a severe heart condition in the first place. She has had 2 short medical leaves to deal with her heart condition, and also she was transferred to Garchak prison, which is supposedly the worst prison, women's prison in Iran. And days after being transferred to Garchak prison, she got COVID. So now she has both a heart condition and COVID. She was on a second medical leave to get angioplasty just about a week and a half ago. We were talking to her on the phone, on Zoom, one morning, and she said that she just got a 2-week extension so she could have some time to recuperate. And then later that day, they told her, nope, you're going back to prison. And the next day, she was back in Garchak prison. Not only that, but on her way to prison, she got a phone call saying that the authorities have frozen all their financial assets.
My God, I mean, it's gut-wrenching to hear the continuous injustice that she and many like her are experiencing. Your footage was shot by anonymous filmmakers because of the situation on the ground. What can you tell us about your team that captured these powerful moments and images?
Well, as you know, we really couldn't go there for several reasons. One, Jeff had made several other films about Iran, which is actually how we first came aware of Nasrin, a film called Education Under Fire, about the persecution of the Baha'i people of the Baha'i faith in Iran, and Nasrin has defended people of, Baha'is in Iran. So obviously we would have been arrested, but I think we also felt an American crew on the ground following her around. Also, it would have been impossible because we also would have been arrested or filming would have stopped right away. So having these filmmakers so close to her very discreetly allowed a lot more intimacy. And we decided, we weren't told who these people were. But Jeff had the experience in the past of working with cinematographers in Iran where he could communicate things he was looking for and sending over notes and, other information about what he hoped to capture. And there was a couple of different people at different times who did follow her closely and somehow managed to not be found out or caught or seen, or no one was really aware that it was going on. And we kept the whole thing very secret anyway, because we really wanted to protect Nasrin through all of this. Even from the very beginning, from the very first start of making the film, we said, are you sure? When we first approached her, are you sure? Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure this is not going to be dangerous for you? And she was no, every single time. We must have asked about 20 times whether or not she wanted to keep going. And she did really want to keep going. And then throughout the making, through the making of the film and then the editing of the film, and actually up until really October when we premiered the film, we kept this film very secret. The money that we raised through private donors. We never did crowdsourcing. We never went out and promoted the film. We waited to the very last possible minute to make sure that it kept her and everybody involved with the film safe for as long as possible.
And Marcia, I want to ask you this, because this film has done something that I have not seen done about Iran in my lifetime. Your documentary captures Iran's true power, its women. And Nasrin truly represents this millennia-old power. In fact, you quote, in 530 BC, women in ancient Persia have the legal right to own property, manage their finances, receive an education, and choose their spouse. This has been the foundation of our diversity, of our strength in the region, has been our women. They run our lives in a very positive way. Tell us about the discovery of Iran's real strength, Iran's women, that you guys were able to cultivate with this wonderful, wonderful depiction.
Well, the women's rights movement in Iran is so incredibly strong. And I think you see in the footage the women taking to the streets. We have a series of incredible black and white photos of, miles and miles of women in the streets, protesting. And there was also the 1979, and then there was the 1 million signature campaign. And the women have really been really strong advocates for their rights and the rights of other people. And they have worked together really, really well. That's something I really took away from making the film, was how integral, how tight all these women were with each other, how closely they worked together and stood together. That they worked together to try to change things on behalf of each other and with each other. Nasrin has such incredibly strong relationships with other women. And I love that about her. And I love that about some of the women that I met that were her friends, outside of Iran. The other thing too, is the fearlessness of these women. The idea that, one, the women, as you see, when they had the Girls of Revolution Street going out into the streets and taking off their headscarves and, in public to protest the mandatory hijab law. Knowing full well that they could get arrested, but they do it anyway. I mean, that is also something really marvelous, the fearlessness of these people. And also, and something I really wanted to understand, this is very important to me, is we're talking about Nasrin being in prison, and she's also a mother, as most of the women we met have children. And how you do that? Is there what's the sacrifice? Or I'm a mother, so could I really put myself at that kind of risk if it meant being taken away from my children and not seeing them for years at a time? But what I learned is that this is not how they think. At least not Nasrin, not the women that I met. They really feel passionately that they need to make this change for their children and for the future of Iran and for other women. And so they don't view it as a sacrifice. In a way, that they're true believers that this is really the right thing to be doing. It's not really the question. It's we need to do this.
Two things that, if I could, because we made this film over the course of the Trump administration, when we were seeing a lot of civil rights, human rights, and women's rights being rolled back in the United States, or at least a very, very strong attempt to push them back in the United States. And so it was inspiring and illuminating to see these women over the course of decades risking so much for their rights in Iran, and when they got knocked down, getting back up again. It's just, it really puts anyone who's apathetic in the United States in perspective when they see these women in Iran. But I also wanted to say that, in Iran, you're right, about 60% of college graduates in Iran are women. Women have been an enormous social resource, intellectual resource in Iran for decades. And yet, if you look at international surveys of women's earning power, Iran is at the bottom of the list. And as far as rights for women, even though they are so empowered intellectually in Iran, up until recently, they couldn't go see a soccer match, and still only under certain circumstances. Women aren't allowed to be judges in courtrooms. There are so many ways where women have the most narrow divorce protections. It's very easy to have their children taken away. It's very easy for them to be slandered and hurt by their husbands. Anyway, I'm just saying that, as you say, they are a fabulous resource for that country, but that country also treats them terribly. And it's time for that to change.
Something both you guys touched on. For us outside of Iran, production on your film, I think, began in mid-2016, around the time the Trump administration imposed the Muslim travel ban, and has throughout now sanctioned Iranians from food and medicine during this pandemic. Do you think these policies help or harm Nasrin's work?
I'm, as Marcia knows, I'm anxious to answer this question. I have hated hearing Trump administration officials call for human rights in Iran when our own record is so horrendous. And so I always want to say that it only counts to call for other countries to have a better human rights record if you apply that same standard double to yourself. So first of all, the insistence that these sanctions against Iran, after it was us, the United States, that ripped up the nuclear accord deal, not the Iranians. God knows that their hands aren't clean, but they weren't the ones who did it. We did. We walked away from it when we had negotiated a very strong deal. And then to have sanctions that really go after the way the most vulnerable live, medical supplies, especially in the time of COVID, is, and it's just disgusting. Both countries have a very complicated history with each other. But as an American, I can speak about American politicians who have probably no understanding and no desire to understand the history between these two countries and how this country led a coup that helped overthrow a democratically elected government in Iran in 1953. Many times when there have been some steps towards understanding, say after 9/11, we have then, stepped on those opportunities. There have been really bad behaviors from both countries at each other, but it's time to put that aside and find a way to have delicate, careful steps forward in diplomacy.
Well, one of the things we really wanted to do with the film is actually address that the people are not the government. Because, as Americans, what do we really know about Iran? I mean, we don't study it in school. We don't study it in our history books. That's not part of that. And so what we only know is government to government. What do you read in the news? The saber rattling, the stuff that goes on between the two governments, the politics. You don't really see the people that much. And, the reality is that the people of the country are not the government. I mean, every one of us doesn't represent the person who's our president either. And there are many people in Iran. I mean, there's a common humanity that we all share that is not really seen in a public way if you're just focusing on the politics between the two countries. And that's something we really wanted to get across, that there's a vibrant culture in Iran, that it's a well-educated culture, that people bring their children, walk their children to school every day and go to the theater and have the beautiful mountains, and it's a beautiful country that people love. There's so much to Iran. And it's not just, what's happening in Washington, D.C. and Tehran.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with you. The visuals that you guys presented with the mountains, the beautiful snow on Tehran, the bazaars, the civil society, a small tea that people would have in their homes really showed the Iranian civil society. And here at Ploughshares Fund, we were strong and we are strong advocates of the nuclear deal. Not only do we think that this will strengthen non-proliferation in the region, but also we thought that the economic engagement, cultural engagement with Iran will strengthen their civil society so they could check their authoritarian government with much more power. And unfortunately, we had said that if this was not the case, if economic and cultural engagement was stopped, then the authoritarian wings, like the Revolutionary Guard, would be enhanced, and they have been enhanced across the black market and militias in the region. And to that point, again, this human-to-human relationship that you guys have just talked about, you emphasize the need for public pressure and public awareness to make a difference. What are some examples of making a difference for Nasrin and her cause? What actions do you urge our listeners to take?
Sure. First of all, just to follow up on what you're saying as far as the nuclear accord is concerned, there are some opponents of the nuclear accord who say, well, we have to have human rights first, or add so many things to the nuclear accord that it's impossible to move forward. And of course, on the other side, there's those who say no agreement with this regime is possible. We need to just bomb them or have regime change. I strongly think that you can move forward with the nuclear accord and human rights at the same time, and they're mutually supportive because they build some ability to connect and have respect and have confidence in each other. And I think that directly connects to a way forward on behalf of Nasrin and other political prisoners. Our film was obviously a film that had a story that we wanted to tell, but it's also become something much bigger than that. With Nasrin's arrest and the global campaign on her behalf, it's really been a chance to amplify her voice. And it's been gratifying to see how Nasrin and her husband Reza have connected to the film. So if people go to our website, which is www.nasrinfilm.com, there's ways now to see the film, which we obviously want people to do. That's a wonderful way to get to know Nasrin. But there are all these links also so that you can support organizations that are supporting not just Nasrin, but other individuals like her who also need your help. One thing we found, and Nasrin and Reza will be the first to say, is that public pressure is absolutely key, that the Iranian regime does respond to pressure and to shame. And by the way, officials in our country will respond to people here saying, hey, don't forget Nasrin, don't forget other political prisoners. And that's not just for Iran, but that's for countries all around the world.
So we have a petition. We've been working closely with PEN America that's had a petition and then a revised petition that, people around the world have signed. And we urge people to sign that petition in support of the release of Nasrin and other political prisoners. We also have links to a lot of the different organizations that are human rights defenders that have supported the film that are also doing their own actions too. And they're live links so people can click onto something if it interests them. And they can actually, and the other thing we've done is we've had impact screenings around the world for a lot of different organizations. And particularly for groups that really care about the subject matter and are actually launching petitions. We did something with the International Law Society and the Bar Association of England and Wales, and there was a petition by 25 or more lawyers that went to Iran from around the world, and we spoke at the European Parliament, and then they released a statement. So there's ways that organizations can also host screenings of the film and then have dialogue that has been leading to a lot of different actions that have been taken subsequent to these impact screenings.
Yeah, and I can just add to that because, again, we're talking about these remarkable people in Iran who go out on the streets to demand basic human rights, basic civil rights. And Nasrin does that in the courtroom in so many ways. Well, we can apply their lesson and inspiration to us here in the United States. So, we're facing some big decisions with Iran right now, and and again, individual actions do add up. They do make a difference. So you can write to your congressperson. You can write to the Biden administration. If you're represented by someone who has not supported the nuclear deal with Iran in the past, tell them you supported it and why. People do pay attention. People in authority pay attention, and you can make a difference. And God knows if Nasrin can put herself at a risk of arrest in Iran, you can find time to write a letter to your congressperson. And
I also feel like that some of the people that Biden's been naming in the new administration are really receptive in new ways. That certainly, even Biden, before, when he was running for office, had an editorial in CNN talking about Nasrin's release. So this administration is very aware of her.
I want to thank you for this incredible work and the hope you've given me and given all of us. And I feel the strongest point Nasrin made in the movie was when she said, if I fail, the next generation will learn from this work. That makes me incredibly optimistic and proves that not just Iran, but the world, through this social work, will keep moving toward diversity and tolerance. Thank you, guys. Just one more time, can you repeat for us where we can watch this film, Nasrin?
Sure. The film is now available on demand. So it is on iTunes. It is on Amazon. It's on Prime Video. It's on Google Play. It's, I think, Vudu. So 5 or 6 places that it is available. And if you and also you can go to our website, the Nasrin Film website, and the minute you open up on the landing page, there's a button that says watch, and then it just takes you, it links you. You can just push a button and it will link you to any one of those places if that's the place of choice you want to see the film.
Fantastic. Marcia, Jeff, thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your work, and it's very courageous. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Good to see you.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit ploughshares.org.